Hello. Question for the facilitators if you would like to be recorded today. No pressure, but I would like to ask.
I don't mind being recorded. I'm going to wait for my co-facilitator to see if she has a preference.
Okay, we can give it a second.
Okay, well, we are going to go ahead and get started. And then Karari, if you need to switch platforms at any time, just let me know and we can just pause to do that.
Continue. It's not working.
What'd you say? You were frozen on my end.
No, I was saying that let's continue. Try to jump on. So we'll just have it on my phone. See if this works better.
Okay, perfect. Okay, can folks see this presentation okay? Karari, can you see it? Okay, tech support.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Excited to be here with you all today. My name is Richla Davis. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a psychotherapist and an anti-oppression consultant. And I am here with my co-facilitator, Karari.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karari. My pronouns are she, her. I am an activist, advocate for trans Latina women with the Trans Latina Coalition, and I'm also a consultant for Praxis Group.
So today we are going to be talking to you all about creating a culture of accountability and care in domestic violence advocacy. So we start all of our trainings with this idea of cultural humility. For those of you who aren't familiar with this term, cultural humility, you might be more familiar with the idea of cultural competency. I personally have been trying to move away from this idea of cultural competency the more that I engage in DEI work, simply because this idea of cultural competency signifies that there is a completion that you are striving for, as opposed to what cultural humility asks us all to do, which is committing to a lifelong process of learning, self-reflection, self-critique, leaning into this willingness to understand different points of views. And what I think is most important in anti-oppression work is engaging humbly, right? So reminding us that we don't have all of the answers. None of us know everything about different folks and different cultures. So if we're engaging in this work humbly, it's going to prevent us from being defensive. It'll help us manage our defenses and help us be able to communicate with each other so that we can learn, which is what is necessary for this work. And we like to note that Tervalon and Maria Garcia are two Black women who coined the term of cultural humility.
And this is just going to be an overview of what we're going to talk about today. We have like introductions. Obviously, it's a little hard over Zoom just because, you know, we are not in the same room together. We're not able to do that. But we're going to try to do a little bit of that. We're also going to explore our group expectations. So that way, as a group, as we all know that there is no such thing as a safe space, what we do here is create essentially, like when you have a new baby and you baby-proof the room, right? You want people to feel as close to safe as possible. And that's why we're going to have these group expectations. Also, we're going to explore our experiences around workplace norms. We're going to talk about the bystander intervention and how to do it. And of course, what happens if you're the one getting called in, and some case studies as well. At the end, we'll have some time to wrap up and some questions. But yeah, let's get started. So we've already introduced ourselves, right? So we don't have to do that, but definitely we want to point out the fact that when we introduce ourselves, we use our pronouns. We believe very importantly in disclosing our pronouns simply because it allows people to understand that you're a person who is safe to disclose their pronouns or their gender identity. As we were doing this presentation, we focus a lot on the intersection of race, gender identity. So when we're talking about domestic violence, we're also making sure that we bring in these voices. And so that's kind of one of the main takeaways from our own introductions was, pronouns. So if you want to, please update your Zoom name, and you can put your name and your pronouns you heard that way in case, you have a question, we know exactly what pronouns to use.
So I'm going to go over our expectations or agreements that we would like everyone to honor during our time together. As a therapist, I love to make sure that we're all engaging in the same way in the room, and especially when we are talking about anti-oppression and conversations around that, I want to make sure that we are all engaging in similar ways so that we can make sure that we are reducing harm as much as possible. So the first expectation for our time together today is using I statements. So you're making sure that when you were talking about an experience, that you are honoring that it is your own personal experience and you're not generalizing for the public or speaking on behalf of whatever identities that you belong in. The second expectation is speaking your first draft. So we like to use this concept when engaging in these conversations, simply because oftentimes, because of the white supremacy culture that we've all been socialized under, we've all been socialized to want to engage in a perfect way or show up in a space in a perfect way, right? So putting pressure on yourself to be the expert, to articulate yourself in a perfect way. And if you don't feel like that you're able to engage in that way, it often prevents you from speaking up, from asking questions. And this work is a huge component of doing this work well, is being able to engage with each other in that way. So today, if you have a question or a comment and either you're not sure the language to use, or you're having a hard time articulating yourself, or maybe you're worried that what you want to say isn't politically correct, we want to challenge you to just name that you're speaking your first draft. That's going to signal to us in the group to either you're going to invite us to maybe help you articulate yourself, or that's just a way for you to signify that maybe your comment or question or statement isn't fully parsed out. So it's kind of an invitation for us all to engage together. The next expectation is committing to dialogue and continued learning and not solutions. So in order for us to have this be impactful conversation, we're hoping that you all will be engaged. We don't want to just sit here and lecture for 90 minutes. So as interactive as this can be, I think that it'll allow everyone to take something from this and hopefully remember some of the content that we share with you all today. The next expectation is to honor intent versus impact. So we can assume that everyone in this space is bringing the best intentions into this space, but we don't know if that's the case, and that is never a guarantee. And often us focusing on intention versus impact distracts from the work that needs to be done in an anti-oppressive space. And so the metaphor that I like to use is, if you were out driving your car, the assumption is that we all have the intention that we're not trying to hit other cars. But if I do end up hitting someone's car, I have to honor the impact that my car has on the other car, as opposed to the good intentions that I brought into my car, into my experience as a driver, right? So that's the metaphor that I like to use, just to remind folks that the impact of our behavior has to be honored and elevated in order to do this work in an effective way. The last expectation that we noted is committing to centering those marginalized experiences. So as long as we are making sure that when we are engaging with each other today, that we are honoring marginalized experiences, we're putting them in the forefront of our conversation, and they are motivating the ways in which we are engaging with each other, this is going to be another way for us to be able to manage harm while also acknowledging that it's impossible for us to avoid harm at all costs. We're all there's always potential for harm to be caused, but as long as we are elevating and centering those of marginalized experience, we'll be able to reduce it in the best way that we can. Are there any other group expectations that folks need? You can either share out verbally, but also if you would like to just engage with the chat, that's fine as well. Any group agreements that you think would be helpful for us as we engage together, or anything that any of you need in order for us to show up with each other for the next 90 minutes? Okay, wonderful. Okay, I can't hear you. Can other people hear Karari?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone. So I just want to take a moment. Now we're going to really focus on what would accountability look like in a domestic violence advocacy. And so this is going to be a moment for us to have conversations amongst each other. So we're going to have you all split up into groups of 3. I'm hoping the IT person can do them groups of 3. And so we want to have you address these questions. What would inclusive and accountable domestic violence advocacy look like? What would it feel like? Who are the stakeholders needed to create this kind of culture? Also, we want you to think about what practices, languages, behaviors would help create this culture of accountability. And lastly, what is currently happening in your community? What behaviors and practices and policies challenge inclusion or accountability? And those are going to be the 3. You should have gotten an alert on your tablet and your computer. And so we will be back in about 15 minutes. So please, we're going to copy and paste into the chat so that way you all have access to these questions.
Everyone back? I believe everyone's back.
Right.
Everyone was lost in this void, which is good news.
Do you want to put the questions back up, Richla? So we can, or I guess we can leave it off so that people can see each other's faces, right?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had really good conversations regarding this. And I think it's very important when we have these conversations early on with groups. It's just because we feel like it's very, very important for us to start naming what it is that we're actually all working towards. Because it can be that some of us are not working towards the same vision of accountability and inclusivity that other people, like they might envision it like, tokenism, right? Where there's like, we want to have one person from each representing their voice. Or it could be sometimes that we are thinking that, no, we shouldn't have this hierarchy and we should be inclusive of everyone and have lots of different voices. So it's important for us to start naming those things. Like, what does it actually look like so that you can actually build what you want, right? Because otherwise, sometimes we build solidarity with groups and people that don't necessarily have the same vision that we do for what an inclusive and accountable culture looks like. And so now I turn it back to y'all. So what would an inclusive and accountable culture look like, right? Particularly when we're talking about domestic violence advocacy. What does it feel like? Or alternately, what is currently happening, right? With what's going on in your communities right now and the work that you're doing right now, that makes it challenging for inclusion to happen. And you can just like turn the audio on and say whatever you'd like to say, or something that the group said, or you can use a chat also, whichever you're most comfortable with.
In our group, we talked about the need for diversity beyond just with like in staffing. We needed diversity in leadership, diversity in decision making, really. So even diversity in our funders. So beyond like even racial diversity, which even if our agency has it, my agency does, all the way up to the top, our funding resources are not diverse, they're all governmental. And so we see where that money is directed and what kind of work we do. So that's what we were talking about. Inclusivity means, you know, diversity in decision-making, who gets to decide what we do, what kind of work we focus on, and then diversity in, you know, the decision-making comes from who funds us as well. So that was how we discussed inclusion. We only got to the first question, and not even all of us got to.
It's a very big question. Thank you for
Yes.
sharing. Anyone else who maybe did make it to the other questions?
Our group talked a little bit about diversity of tactics in a way, because some of us were social workers, but some of us are not. And so we just sort of touched on the idea that there is also work that needs to be done in the communities themselves to provide support to both people who are survivors and accountability for folks who are perpetrating violence, to really have these conversations. Because one of the people in our group talked about how, as a social worker, you know, once you guys leave that space, there's only so much you can do, but there's work to be done kind of in all these different areas.
Sure, definitely. Tactics is a very good one. We definitely need to be able to understand that there's not just one way of doing the work. I think Diana says training on all levels. Sorry, let's see where it was. So training on all levels of the system, especially with the police. Okay, thank you. Definitely. We will touch on the police later on in our presentation as well. Anyone else want to share anything?
Kind of to reflect upon that, we talked about accountability outside of the prison system and the police system, recognizing that those systems aren't systems of accountability and are systems of criminalizing brown and Black people as sources of punishment. So we were kind of exploring what accountability looks in a transformative justice sense, meaning how do we center supporting the person who had survived while also addressing the person that was being harmful and holding them accountable for their impact, and how we talk to them and have them address the needs of the person who had survived. Of course, with the consent and agency of the person who had survived, whatever they need in that moment to heal and feel unconditionally loved and supported. So we were exploring it outside of the realms of oppressive systems like police and the prison system. And we didn't get much to it because we ran out of time, but we were starting to explore that.
Thank you so much. And Dawn said in the chat, our group talked about how it's hard to imagine inclusivity and accountability at all within the systems currently operating: legal, criminal, advocacy, education, etc. Also being respectful of the survivors, victims, never placing our ideas or views on them. The whole, if it was that bad, they should just leave, and respecting the needs of the survivors, victims, and holding abusers accountable. That was Diana. Hillary shared unrestricted funding for that survivors, advocates can choose how to spend and use. Definitely, I think oftentimes there are those restrictions. I think that one of the previous people who spoke mentioned, right, that difference, there's no difference, or there's no diversity in the funding sources, and the funding sources essentially inhibit where funds can be used for disproportionately affects undocumented people and undocumented survivors. We talked about ensuring that survivors have accountability towards us as advocates, definitely. Make sure we don't replicate the power control wheel within our work. That is very powerful. Thank you, Tessa. Anyone else want to share anything else? And these are all very important conversations, right? That when this, and it's kind of nice to know that in this space, it seems like we have a very similar vision of what accountability looks like. So that's always a good sign, right? That's always a good sign that you have definitely surrounded yourself with great people that will be vital to our liberation collectively. If there's nothing else, then we can move on to our next activity. And again, if something comes up, please feel free to use the chat. Please feel free to, raise your hand, ask questions as they come up as well. It's always good to have people interacting.
So for this next activity, we're going to help you all explore your comfortability with giving feedback and intervening when it comes to domestic violence situations. So for those of you who haven't seen this image before, it's the comfort zone infographic. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read off a series of scenarios. And what I want you to do is, for those of you who are familiar with the Zoom reactions, if the scenario that I read, if you feel comfortable giving feedback or intervening in that moment, I want you to either do the Zoom reaction of thumbs up, or you could just put in the chat comfort. If the scenario is, if the scenario that I read, your comfort level kind of depends on the situation, right? So it might depend on context. It might depend on who's a part of the scenario, right? So if your comfort is dependent on the context, then you're gonna note it as the learning zone. So you can again either put that in the chat, or your reaction for learning zone I'm blanking on, but when I take us off the share screen, I'll let you all know what the learning zone reaction is. And then the panic zone is not under any circumstances would I feel comfortable intervening or providing feedback for this scenario. And for that one, you can either put, I believe the reaction option is a red X, or you can do a thumbs down. So again, comfort zone, I feel totally comfortable intervening or providing feedback. Learning zone is it depends on the context. And panic zone is I do not feel comfortable intervening or engaging with the scenario in any way. So I'm gonna stop the share so I can see everyone's faces. Okay, so what we'll do is comfort zone. I feel totally comfortable. We can either do a heart, or you can put in the chat comfort. For learning zone, we'll do thumbs up, or you can just put learning in the chat. And then if you don't feel comfortable at all, you can, if you have the thumbs down, you can do the thumbs down, or I think some folks have the red X, or of course you can just put do not feel comfortable in the chat, or panic. Does everyone understand the activity? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, awesome. So the first scenario is your domestic violence agency only allows temporary housing for people who are female assigned at birth. Can you put the reactions in the chat? Yes, I will put that in the chat right now before folks react to this first one. So comfort zone, we'll do heart. Learning zone, we'll do thumbs up. Panic zone is red X. Okay, so again, I'll read that first scenario. Your domestic violence agency only allows temporary housing for people who were female assigned at birth. How comfortable are you intervening in this situation? Or providing feedback, let's say challenging your agency? I'm seeing a lot of comfortable in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of red hearts. Comfortable intervening. Someone put learning. So maybe it depends on the context. So maybe it depends on how comfortable you are, how comfortable you feel in your agency that you're working with. It might be your comfort depends on who implements rules and policies in your agency and what your relationship is like with that person. maybe if you have more of a leadership role in your agency, you might feel more empowered to confront this policy. Give folks a couple more seconds to indicate their reaction if they would like to. What I want you all to keep in mind as we're doing this activity is not only to reflecting on your own comfort, but also to pay attention to the other participants in the room, what their comfort zone and reaction is as well. Because I think it can be easy for us to make assumptions around if we feel comfortable, then maybe everyone else at my agency would feel comfortable, right? Or making an assumption that your friends might also have the same comfort level as you, and that might not be the case. Bless you. I see Mary Beth is sneezing, bless you. Okay. The next scenario is you notice your domestic violence agency supervisor is promoting marketing for the agency in primarily white and or affluent areas. What's your comfort level around intervening? I'll read it again. You notice your domestic violence agency supervisor is promoting marketing for the agency in primarily white and or affluent areas. What's your comfort level around intervening or speaking up, saying something? I'm seeing some comforts. Okay, it looks like there's quite a few comforts. Okay, the next one is, you see on Facebook that your cousin reposted a meme that jokingly mentions slapping a partner for infidelity. What's your comfort around saying something? You see on Facebook that your cousin reposted a meme that jokingly mentions slapping a partner for infidelity. Seeing comfort times 3, absolutely. I'm seeing some comforts. I am seeing a few learning.
It's a good question. On Facebook or in private, I guess whatever you imagined would be your immediate response.
Okay. The next scenario. You are shopping at the grocery store and see someone being verbally harassed by their partner. Where are you in the zone? Are you panicking? Are you not going to intervene? Be honest with yourself, right? These are isolated events, right? You're not necessarily in a situation where maybe you're, with other folks, right? These are two strangers, and you're seeing two strangers in a altercation. Learning everyone's safety is a concern, comfort, but would consider the safe best way to intervene, right? So there's some context that's important for this situation, right? Sometimes intervening could put the victim at more risk for violence, right? Like what are the ramifications for me intervening in this setting, right? It's not as black and white as we would like it to be in terms of what even we're able to do in some of these situations. Another person said it would depend. I would consider safety. Okay. Diane says if I felt it would put them at further risk, then it would be learning for me, right? Okay, so it would depend on the context. When we're thinking about our learning zones, I also want you all to be thinking about what context will impact your comfortability with intervening, right? Whether maybe it's the race of the couple might make you feel either more comfortable or less comfortable to intervene. Age could play a component. Thinking about folks' intersectional identities is also going to play a role in terms of how our implicit biases allow us to feel comfortable in certain situations and in intervening for certain folks. And if you're finding that some of those intersections are have more privilege than others, I also want to challenge you to think about why is that I might feel more comfortable in certain spaces than others to intervene. The next scenario is you're at your friend's home and your friend begins to insult their partner for having gained weight during the pandemic. What is your comfort around intervening? Folks are saying comfortable, seeing a lot of hearts, a lot of comfort. Seems like people reacted to this one a lot quicker than the other ones too. Okay, it seems like a lot of folks would feel comfortable saying something, intervening. The next scenario, your coworker shares a news article on Twitter claiming that trans women are dangerous to cis women in sports and should not be allowed to participate. What's your comfort around intervening? This is your coworker. Keep in mind, your coworker is sharing this article on Twitter. So maybe it's a peer, but maybe it's your supervisor. Okay, Dawn saying comfort and learning, right? Learning comfort. So it depends on the situation, might depend on your relationship with that person, might depend on your relationship with your job, right? Keeping in mind that some of us don't necessarily have the privilege to challenge in a way that we might want to at our workplace for risk of losing our job. Learning and comfort. Okay, so it seems like there was a lot more learning in this situation. Okay, we've got two more. Your sister asked if you'd like some of her crop tops and short skirts because her partner does not allow her to wear revealing clothing anymore out of respect to their relationship. I'm gonna read that one more time. Your sister asked if you'd like some of her crop tops and short skirts because her partner does not allow her to wear revealing clothing anymore out of respect to their relationship. Where are you on comfort zone scale? A lot of folks are saying comfort. I'm seeing some learning zones. Again, context probably going to matter in the situation. What's your relationship like with your sister? How close are you all? What do you all feel comfortable discussing in terms of your roles and relationship? Amanda says it's difficult because that is her choice. So if she was open for discussion, it would be comfortable. Okay. This might be a situation where we're thinking about intervening. Intervention doesn't necessarily mean completely challenging. It might be just opening up the conversation for dialogue, maybe asking some more questions and giving some context around how your sister's feeling, how did this conversation come about? Maybe this could be an opportunity for you to allow her to share more about her relationship, keeping in mind that if this is a potentially violent or unhealthy relationship, what type of allegiance do you want to build with your sister so that, she would feel comfortable sharing something with you as well. The final one is, and Karari, you're going to have to help me pronounce this because I'm not going to pronounce it right. Your partner is Latino and finds it really funny to share memes and TikToks about getting hit as a child with. Are you on mute?
La chancla and chancleta. So which is in Spanish for like the slipper, basically.
Got it. Okay. Your partner is Latino and finds it really funny to share memes and TikToks about getting hit as a child with a slipper. Okay, thank you. What is our comfort around that? Okay, a lot of folks are saying learning very quickly. Learning zone. Okay, this looks like this is, and someone put panic zone. I think this might be the first panic I've seen. Okay, a lot more learning zones for this final scenario. I'm curious if anyone would like to share a little bit more about why this scenario put more folks in the learning and panic zone. It seems like all of the other scenarios, I don't think I saw any panic zones. I might have missed it, but I don't think I saw any panic zones for any of the other scenarios. Why is this one for folks a lot more contextual? You can either share out or put it in the chat. Learning because that is someone's own experience. Oh, I'm sorry.
Say something. No, it's okay. No, the reason I did it was just because for me, I mean, I grew up like, I think it was kind of like a cultural thing, and I didn't, it was, I guess for me, the reason why it was kind of hard for me even to like, to say how I wanted to intervene was if I wanted to intervene was because I kind of was, it's, I feel like it also too, it might also been a generational thing, that was how we were growing up culturally. I don't think it was something that was, like meant intentionally, like at least in my situation, my experience to hurt, that I think was just more just growing up, part of, the structure, discipline. But, I think again, it's a generational thing, so that's why for me, it was kind of a little bit hard to automatically, intervene because of my experience.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like for some folks, if you experienced this scenario and whatever your, the impact of this experience for you might impact the way that you would speak up or not speak up at all, right? So maybe for someone else, if they had this experience and they found it to be really traumatic, maybe they would say something and say, hey, that's not really funny. This really affected me. And I'm grateful that you spoke up and said that, because I think that this is also important for us to keep in mind in terms of how we normalize certain behaviors based on culture. And a lot of the work that I do as a therapist is, helping folks unpack their racial trauma. And a lot of that comes from these like generational traditions or generational ways of disciplining. And it can be really complicated when we learn the ways that we've been disciplined and then act those out in our romantic relationships as well. So then the context in which we're transferring those behaviors can be problematic. But I'm also hearing that folks aren't feeling that it is their role to challenge someone's experience if it's from their culture, versus maybe if it was a white person sharing that meme about, this Latina experience, maybe you'd have more of a reaction.
Yeah.
I want to share. So I agree with the previous speaker. I put panic because so I'm also the child of immigrants from Africa. So it's a very shared experience in terms of like the corporal punishment. And I know for a lot of like people my generation, like the younger generations, you kind of bond over like, hey, like, that happened to me too, or I had that same punishment too. So I'm like, I don't want to take away from the experience, and like growing up and like doing the work and unpacking, I'm realizing that like, hey, maybe that wasn't the best way my parents could have gone about it, but it still happened to me. And the only way I personally know how to deal or cope with it is to like make a joke out of it, or laugh about it, because that's just the way I learn. That's just where I'm at. And if someone else is there at that same level, who am I to be like, man, that's wrong, like you should go to therapy, that's abuse, like, I'm just gonna meet you where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like I'm Mexican and like I'm an immigrant myself, but like my parents, because of their experiences growing up, did not believe in like ever hitting us. Or like, I never experienced that. So it was kind of different, but I know a lot of my friends did. And I think that I felt comfortable having conversations about it because my friends have conversations about it online where they're like, oh, this is also funny, but oh, this is also not okay, and so like people are having conversations with, that's why I kind of like was like in the comfort zone, because even though people make a lot of jokes about it and you're meeting people where they're at, there's a lot of people who are also kind of like, oh, I wasn't okay with this. Were you okay with this? And it's more of a dialogue discussion around like, culture, like in terms of like, you know, like the whole chancla situation, or just really anything, you know, like especially during like the pandemic, we can't see each other. So people are having like discussions on like group chats or something, you know, about random things like this, right? And so I feel like more comfortable addressing it. Also, like, I don't know, I do remember certain experiences of happening to other people where it really did get out of hand, and it was really traumatic for the other people involved. So yeah, I could see it going like in a lot of different directions.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm also seeing in the chat other folks are relating to Caro. Correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I'm seeing Lewis said, sharing these sentiments. My family immigrated from China, and relatives joke about this regularly. And Hema saying, I think it's a common joke amongst first generation kids. So it sounds like for a lot of folks, it's a way to bond. And again, the therapist in me is wondering if this is a form of trauma bonding, which is a very, common way that folks can cope. And again, context definitely matters. And, folks have the right to share their experience in whatever way feels comfortable for them. But I also want us to be thinking about the ways in which these traditions will impact our ability to identify when situations are abusive, right? So if the context in which my upbringing was there, hitting was normal and it was it was an appropriate way of disciplining, what is the line for me feeling like that's an acceptable way to engage with my friends or my partner, right? And like how does my personal experience impact the way that I'm going to intervene for other people?
I share a thought?
Absolutely.
I was thinking about when I was in school, I majored in women and gender studies, and a big point that was repeated by my professors was that culture does not mean that something can escape critique. That doesn't make it untouchable. And a lot of problematic things have been normalized in a lot of cultures, and that doesn't mean that we can't critique that. And so I think that example was first exposed to me with the concept of genital mutilation. Of some people argue, oh, well, that's their culture, so who are we to go and critique it? But at the same time, there are so many people even within that culture who are critiquing it. And so applying that to other places with like the church, oh, just because it's the church, can we not critique it? No, we can still, like, we should be able to critique things no matter if it's culture or if it's religious. And just thinking of, yes, jokes can be a coping mechanism for people, but thinking about within the comedy world, is this joke punching up? Is it punching at those causing harm? Is it critiquing those causing harm? Or is it punching down? Is it making fun of or being used against those who have been harmed? And so being able to identify when a joke is challenging the status quo or reinforcing the status quo. And I think about this a lot with TikToks that are normalizing sibling abuse. I see that and I understand that people may like it or share it because they have that experience of bullying a sibling being normalized or hurting a sibling being normalized. But for survivors who maybe it went a little further, it was a little more severe, I see that as normalizing this behavior and seeing that it's okay. So that's how I approached that scenario.
Thank you, Rose, for sharing that. And it definitely sounds like that context matters. And I want us to be mindful of time. I would love for us to continue talking about this. But yes, it sounds like that everyone is thinking about the ways in which our own personal experiences with cultures and other cultures will, impact how we're showing up in the context of violence, which is what I want everyone to be, thinking about, just in terms of how we've been conditioned, and that's going to impact how we show up in these spaces. So that conversation is actually a perfect segue to this infographic of the pyramid of violence, and why this work is so important to me in Karari is thinking about the culmination of all of our internal biases, which are at the bottom of this pyramid, and what happens when a lot of these internal biases go uninterrupted. So for a lot of folks who were nervous about, interrupting microaggressions or, challenging, violence, whether it's verbal violence or whether it's a joke, right? So even we're thinking about, these videos that we like to reshare, and some of them are funny, and some of them are funny for you and not funny for other people. We have to remember that violence that is happening to folks at the top of this pyramid, whether it's murder, whether it's folks taking their own lives, physical and sexual assault, they never happen in a vacuum. Violence happens as a result of the culmination of all of these internal beliefs that we all hold and all of our implicit biases, right? So a lot of folks share very similar experiences of their, their culture, and how some forms of discipline were normalized, and right, because everyone in my family does it this way, I'm not necessarily seeing it as a problem, right? Or we joke about, certain groups of people in my friend group, and so I'm not seeing it as a big deal. But we have to keep in mind is that the ways in which we engage with folks is going to affect the way that other people think and behave. And so a joke that you make might empower someone who actually does want to act on their violent thoughts, right? It's going to empower them to build those beliefs, right? And the more, and we know the power of groupthink, right? So the more that folks around you are thinking that we think similarly, that's going to empower folks to engage in this violence at the top of the pyramid. So we like to show this infographic just to remind folks of why it's so important for us to show up for other people and interrupt some of these problems as we see them.
I would say since we've been having such great conversation, we could probably skip this one and move on to our agent and target identities. What do you think, Richla?
Yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah, that's really was just like thinking about how and why we didn't react or intervene. And so I think the previous conversation around that, like the culturally specific experiences of violence, and joking about it, and community building around their trauma bonding, I think went really well with those questions. So I think we were able to skip that around. But I want to really talk about agent and target identities. So the idea of an agent identity is one in which it carries privilege, right? And we hear a lot of the terms like privilege, white privilege, male privilege, all those things, right? And that's what we're talking about is agent identities. That means these are people who are able to act on their power. So whatever, this could be people who are white, male, straight, able-bodied, upper middle class, English speaking, citizen, supervisor, landlord. All these people can enact their power, right? And then there's people who the power is enacted on, which there are target identities. And so this includes people who are people of color, people who are Black, female, trans, non-binary, queer, disabled, working class, English as a second language learner, entry level or not leadership role, someone who's like is currently experiencing homelessness. The list goes on and on, right? And so these are the ways in which power manifests itself. And so when we're talking about domestic violence and accountability, we must be aware of the ways in which agent and target identities are constantly interacting, right? Some people might have more target identities than they might have agents, but again, this does not change the fact that we do carry agent identities as well. And that therefore we're able to enact our privilege on others and enact our power in ways that that person isn't able to. It's also important to understand that this could look differently across different agencies. It could look differently across your team at work, even inclusively across like your family or your community. And it's not to say that white, male, straight, upper body, or able-bodied, upper middle class, English-speaking citizen, it doesn't say that these things are bad. It's just, it says that these identities are able to afforded more privilege than the other ones, right? And so it's important for us when we're identifying violence and identifying microaggressions and identifying racism around us, and transmisogyny and misogyny and all the other isms, is that we take into consideration our age and identities, because often what these serve, age and identities, not only allow us to enact our privilege, but also serve as blinders. And so many times we are not able to see how our actions or the actions of other people of our agent identities are targeting other people. Okay, can we move to the next one? All right, and so it's important for us when we're talking about, like earlier we were talking about this kind of like mainstream response and generational trauma and how we all kind of trauma bond over experiences of violence. But it's also important for us to understand this, just because you personally haven't experienced domestic violence doesn't mean it's not happening to people all around you. So it's 15.5 million children are exposed to domestic violence yearly in the US. Also, when hearing people, you really should, or when someone's sharing their experiences of domestic violence or trauma, it's important that you believe them when they tell you their experiences. You're not really there to judge whether it did or didn't happen, or was it really that bad. Oftentimes, this is when I'm working with people who are Latinx. Oftentimes, we do minimize people's experience because our experience was worse. Like, oh, you only got hit with a chancla. Well, I got hit with the belt and the extension cord. And it's like, and you're like, oh, that was nothing, right? But it's important for us when someone is sharing their trauma and the violence that they've experienced, that we don't diminish it. And of course, we should instead focus on how this person was impacted. And again, in addition to knowing about these statistics, 56% of Black, trans, and gender nonconforming people experience domestic violence.
So we wanted to talk about the impact of traditional domestic violence responses and the ways in which we can challenge those. So the negative impact of calling the police for gender minorities and POCs, right? Karari just gave the statistic of how often this happens for people of color and gender minorities. And so we also have to keep in mind, right, keeping in mind the target identities. And the more target identity someone has, the more problematic potentially it could be for you to call the police, right? We know that police act out violence towards gender minorities and POCs exponentially higher than they do for white folks. So keeping that in mind when we are thinking about who are we calling and what type of resources and supports are we looking for when we are, looking to help someone in a domestic violence situation. The lack of accountability with involving the police, right? And knowing that the police system lacks their own accountability, they lack their own accountability just in terms of the system and how the system protects them, right? And so knowing that if you are involving the police, knowing that it's going to be really difficult for you to challenge the police if they do show up to the situation and add more harm, right? That we know that there's a lack of accountability there. Traditional responses hinder restorative justice, right? So these systems that are currently in place in our society, most of them we're starting to challenge them, but unfortunately still the majority of them lack a restorative justice component that doesn't allow for accountability, does not allow for the folks who are being harmed to be, for their experience to be centered, right? And so the system is perfectly designed to protect the system. So we know that these restorative justice interventions that are going to reduce harm and that are gonna honor the victim or the survivor aren't in place. And so that's gonna make it a lot more difficult for us to reduce harm and to manage the situation in a way that is going to be effective for the person who experienced the violence. I'm sure most of us are familiar with the inadequacies within the legal system and knowing that, there's only so much still that is in place that's going to be able to protect a victim or survivor of domestic violence. And so knowing that there's so much domestic violence within the police community, right? There's so much information out there around how many folks who are police have been perpetrators of domestic violence, and knowing that, you know, the ways in which they show up when a domestic violence call happens, and, you know, the lack of training that they have around showing up and, you know, being able to engage in a way that's going to be helpful. We know that that isn't there. And so we want to keep in mind what the impact of these traditional responses are, so that we can think about, you know, what are some potential other options. So we wanted to share with you all some alternatives to traditional domestic violence responses. Call 311 and request a mental health crisis professional. We know that this is contingent on the community that you're in, and some communities have more resources than others. But I would challenge you to and encourage you to research the current mental health crisis lines within your community, so that you know, like, what they look, you know, what they look like, what the resources are within your community, what actually happens if you call them and they show up, right? So maybe doing some research now, so that if you are in this situation, you know, you'll know what to expect. Call a trusted friend for the person being harmed, if that's an option, right? So instead of this instinct to call the police, you know, ask them, you know, is there someone that you would like me to call? Can I call a friend? Can I call a, you know, a family member? Can I call a, you know, a community member? Can I call your pastor? Or can I, right there can be so many other people that they would much rather prefer to kind of show up and intervene over the police. So making sure that you've exhausted all of those options. And of course, you can always call a local domestic violence crisis line. And they also have a lot of resources available, whether it's, you know, temporary shelter housing, whether it's they have someone that can actually physically come out and handle the situation. It does seem like that these domestic violence agencies are a lot more equipped in restorative justice practices. So, you know, the likelihood that they're going to be able to intervene in a way that's a lot more effective is a lot higher.
Thank you, Richla. And so also, we want to remind everyone, right, that we all have an ability to intervene, and there's no one right way to be a domestic violence advocate. There's no one right way to intervene. It's important for us to increase our self-awareness around our own biases. Like Richla said, it's all, how can we expect the police to intervene and be able to identify domestic violence as violence, and to intervene appropriately when they're two to three times more likely to be perpetrators in their own homes, right? It's their own biases prevent them from identifying things. And this doesn't happen with the police, it would happen with us as well, right? And so it's important for us to address the harm when it happens and intervene when it's safe for you to do so. And again, I think we've talked about lots of different scenarios that there's lots of different ways that we can intervene. So there isn't just one specific way. You don't have to be the one personally there to stop the violence itself. There's ways that you can intervene, as Richla had previously mentioned.
Our next section is a case study that we wanted to give you all. And I think for the sake of time, we can just talk about it in the larger group, if that's okay with you, Karari. But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy and paste the scenario into the chat so that everyone has it as I'm reading out. Okay, so the scenario reads, in 2016, police arrested Miss Campbell, a Florida Black trans woman, on murder charges related to the fatal stabbing of a man. According to witness accounts, Miss Campbell stabbed the man, who had a 3-month history of harassing and making unwanted sexual advances towards her, after he hit her with a wooden board. She then responded in self-defense, fatally injuring the man. Miss Campbell's trial was delayed for nearly 10 months while she was held in prison, where she experienced violent transphobia that led to 3 separate attacks. The charges were eventually dropped against Miss Campbell, thanks to witness accounts that corroborated her story. What is happening here in this situation with Miss Campbell? What do you all think needs to be addressed? And how might the identities of the folks identified in this situation affect, you know, what's going on, and how this act of violence will be addressed? I'm curious. Folks can, of course, share out, or if you would prefer to put it in the chat, you can also comment in the chat. And I also want folks to think about, how would you feel in this moment, and how could you interrupt if you were, witnessing this going on in your community?
I think it's important not to punish her. I don't think there's any room for any sort of punishment, especially when somebody is defending their life, their life, and has been harassed for this amount of time. I mean, we kind of already discussed it, but the police system is a system that really only benefits one group of people. The agent that you talked about in the presentation, trans people, specifically Black trans people, are targeted in this society for a million different things, all oppressing them for being who they are. I think it's sad. And if I were there to support in the situation after it happened, it would be to support her. And knowing that this isn't her fault, holding the person accountable for making her feel that way, and just reminding her that she is not subjected to a system of punishment for wanting to live.
Thank you, Katie. I see that someone wrote, as a Black trans woman, the man harassing her doesn't value her and continuously commits violence against her. The system further lets her down by holding her in prison and further subjugating her to violence, right? So, I mean, from the get-go, the system is already problematic in the ways in which it holds people in jail before they've been tried, right? So that's already an issue within the system, where innocent people, there are millions of innocent people who, are currently in prison simply because they either can't make bail or they're waiting for their trial, right? And so that's a problem in itself. We work to find her good legal help and fight to make sure she is not kept in jail while the case is delayed. Rose had problems criminalized and punished for self-defense, held in prison prior to trial, attacked in prison. Why didn't witnesses come forward earlier to corroborate her account? That's a good question, Rose. Ideally, we would all be intervening upstream, working to reduce transphobia and racism in society, holding the man accountable for his ongoing harassment and providing her with support so she never needed to act in self-defense. Absolutely. So a lot of you all identified all of Ms. Campbell's intersectional identities, or these target identities, right? And keeping in mind that the more target identities that you have, the more opportunities that you are going to have where you're experiencing microaggressions or acts of violence. In this case, it wasn't, a physical act of violence. And a lot of you also noted that there's a lack of direct trans support within the legal system, right? That doesn't allow for Ms. Campbell to get that initial support that she deserves in order to allow her to share her story, allow other, witnesses to support her, and for her to probably get some legal support initially, right? Maybe if there were more legal trans initiatives, maybe Ms. Campbell could have got some legal support from the get-go that would have allowed her to not be in prison for 10 months, right? So there's so many different components of this story where the system, and not to mention, just the lack of support for domestic violence victims, that doesn't allow her to receive the justice that she deserves. So I appreciate everyone noting all of that.
I also wanted to add, Richla, like how I think somebody mentioned it, right? That we all contribute to the culture of transphobia, right? And as a trans woman, I think it's important for us to understand that this is actually very common. our sexual and romantic partners tend to be the ones who murder us. And they tend to be people of our own race or people of our own communities that murder us. And so of the 13 murders that happened last year, 8 of them were, of the 13 murders where Black trans women were killed last year, arrests were made in those 13 murders. 8 of those were domestic disputes or intimate sexual partner violence. So again, it's important for us to understand that this doesn't exist in a vacuum, as Richla has said previously, right? And so we contribute to a culture of violence in which we, and essentially also what happened in Atlanta, right? We contribute to a culture that is, anti-Asian, anti-trans, anti-trans woman, anti-Black. And so we're all kind of perpetuating this culture. And it's important for us to not only think about domestic violence intervention as intervening in that violence, but also intervening in things that might not seem directly related to violence, such as the case where we talked about like somebody sharing a post about trans women shouldn't be allowed to play sports because they would hurt cis women, right? That is essentially a talking point that is used against trans women, and which is the reason why they're not able to access housing and safe or survivor resources, because again, for the protection of cis womanhood, trans women are often excluded. And so I think it's important that also when we're talking about how do we intervene, that we're intervening way before the violence actually happens, and we're intervening constantly and being aware of the privileges that we ourselves contain, our agent identities that we ourselves contain, and constantly fighting those.
Thank you, Kadi. Don put in the chat, our small group even discussed the privileging of physical violence above all other forms of abuse, which works against folks who do harm, regardless of intentionality, by defending themselves. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So we wanted to, as we're wrapping up our time together, we kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what if you're the one that gets called in or out. And so when we say getting called in, it means, a form of direct feedback where someone is maybe like pulling you to the side, either after the fact or in a private manner, to give you feedback around the harm that you've caused. And then getting called out is a more outward, a little bit more public form of receiving the feedback in real time. And so if I'm the one that's getting called out, or if I have such a visceral fear around getting called out, it's going to prevent me from even wanting to do the work that we all need to be doing to work against domestic violence. So we wanted to give you all a quick list of do's and don'ts. Manage your defensiveness, right? We've been talking for this 90 minutes around, we've all been conditioned around, all of these, we've all been conditioned to not center marginalized experiences, and we're all actively working against that conditioning, right? So it's normal for defenses to come up, right? So even we were kind of talking about everyone has a variety of experiences around your childhood upbringing and how folks were disciplined, right? Like something that was normal to you might not be normal for someone else. So maybe you see someone talking ill about the disciplining of the slipper, and you might get defensive and say, hey, that wasn't abuse, that happened to me, and that was normal in my household, right? We all have different experiences, and that's okay, but we also have to make sure that we're managing our defenses so that we can have productive conversations. Apologize genuinely if you are causing harm, and if someone is giving you feedback, thank the person for that feedback. The feedback is a gift, and someone giving you feedback puts them in a situation where if someone is giving you feedback, oftentimes it takes a lot of emotional work and labor for them to give you that feedback. So thank them for that, because it might have taken a lot for them to give that to you. Ask for clarification if genuine and needed, right? If you're unsure of why what you did was harmful and you want a little bit of clarification, go ahead and ask for that clarification. Take time and look back if appropriate. Correct the mistake, right? So the example we give is a quick correcting of a mistake is if you misgender someone, right? Make the quick correction by just using the correct pronoun, and then move on, right? So you don't want to go on and on about, oh my God, I'm so sorry that I made that joke about, or I shared that meme. I just did this 90-minute domestic violence accountability workshop I'm doing, right? You going on and on is you're going to put all this pressure on the other person to hold the space for you and contain your feelings. And that distracts from the work that we want to be doing. do your homework, right? So constantly allow yourself to be engaging in this idea of culture humility, which is what we started this training about, right? If we're engaging humbly and reminding ourselves that there's always more work to do, it's going to encourage us to continue taking trainings like these and having these conversations so that we are doing the best that we can to hold these spaces for other people. And lastly, share your preferred methods of receiving feedback if you have any specifics. So don't fake apologize, right? When you say things like, I'm sorry you were offended, I'm sorry the meme offended you, or I'm sorry the language that I used offended you, that's not a genuine apology, and that's taking the accountability away from yourself. So make sure that you are taking accountability for the harm that you caused, right? So don't make it about you. Don't ask the person to educate you and ask, what they did was wrong, right? If you have a little clarification around it, that can be okay. But asking the person to do additional labor to educate you on why what you did was harmful, again, that's putting a lot more emotional labor on the person who is already experiencing the harm. And try not to prove how much of a racist you aren't, or I don't support domestic violence because of blah blah blah, or I'm not a racist because of blah blah blah, or I'm not transphobic because I have a neighbor who's trans, and you don't need to do this like long love letter of why you aren't a bad person. And again, I think this kind of goes back to us managing our defenses. If I'm engaging in culture humility and holding myself accountable to engaging in a culturally humble way, it's going to prevent me from wanting to prove to you that I'm a good person. So we wanted to give you all a quick list of aftercare. So you provided feedback, it went great, maybe it went poorly. How can you take care of yourself? Maybe take space from the situation, right? After you have this conversation where someone gave you some helpful feedback, you might feel emotional, you might feel fatigued. So take some space, ask for what you need from your support system, vent to folks in your support system, maybe delegate. So maybe if you're at work and you're receiving feedback, maybe you want to delegate some of your workload for the day to a trusted colleague so that you can take some additional space for yourself. And then work on normalizing feedback, right? So maybe sharing your experience in a positive way to someone else, where you're like, I caused harm last week and someone gave me feedback, and this is what I learned from it. This is what I'm going to do moving forward to hold myself accountable. So that can be a way that you're normalizing feedback within your community, so that hopefully the goal is that everyone feels comfortable over time engaging in this way, so that we can all do our part to minimize harm. So that is all that we have for you all today. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Karari, before we close out?
No, I'm surprised we got through everything. I'm really happy that we got through everything.
Yes, we were rock stars. We were all rock stars today. Well, thank you all so much for being here and being engaged in dialogue and participating. We really appreciate it. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much.